السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We are discussing the text here where Ibn Hajar rahmallah says لا لشيء خارج وهو الذي يكون حسنه بسبب الاعتضاد نحو حديث المستور إذا تعددت طرقه. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah, as we said, is explaining Hasan li ghayrihi by showing how it differs from Hasan li dhatihi. He's trying to explain that what is a Hasan li ghayrihi. It is that where you have multiple weak chains of transmission, many weak asanid, and then each corroborates the other. So since the Husan here is due to an exterior factor, which is the supporting chains of transmission, this type of narration will be called Hasan li ghayrihi. Hasan due to exterior reasons. What's the exterior reason? The additional asanid, which is not directly linked to this sanad. He then gives the example here of a mastur narrator, and we have explained in the previous lesson who is a mastur narrator. So the point which he is trying to make by giving the example of a mastur is that a narration which has slight weakness is termed as weak, because when there is a narrator who is mastur, we will do it in detail, firstly whether it's weak or not weak, but even if you consider it as weak, the weakness is really minimal. That if you don't know the condition of a person, but you know he's a Muslim, especially in Khairul Qurun, then you would have assumed and you would have regarded him as a reliable person. But even if you had to have doubts, it would have been minimal doubts, because that was an era of piety. So the weakness is minimal. Then he's saying that if there are supporting chains for the slightly weak, so the word slightly is the important word here. It's the slightly weak narration, then it will be strengthened to Hasan. So you can see just from that example of using the word mastur, we're understanding that he's referring to slight weakness and is not referring to extreme weakness. So many asanid which have slight weakness, they all would lend support to each other until they raise it to the level of husn kal habli al muallaf min ash-sha'arat. Like if you have a small twig, how you can break it, and if you put it all together and it becomes a bundle, then it becomes so difficult to break. So when a person here looks at this one particular sanad, he will grade it as da'if. But when he gathers all the different turuq, then he will find that there are so many different turuq which are all da'if with slight weakness, again putting emphasis on the word slight. So then he will conclude that it is Hasan li ghayrihi. And this is why you will very often, you will when you're doing takhrij, you will find differences amongst scholars. Some scholars would say that a particular narration is Hasan, whereas others would say that it is da'if. So those who say that it is Hasan, they have more knowledge basically on this particular matan. They have more knowledge here because they were able to find other supporting asanid. And we have explained this here before, that in order to grade a narration, it's not so simple that you just put it on Maktabat al-Shamila or put it on Google. Rather, firstly, you need to have comprehensive knowledge on all the possible chains of that text. And you also need to know all the different ahadith on that subject, because we have this the reason why you have to know all the different ahadith on that subject is to confirm whether it is shadh or not. It is really in-depth and it's a job of the experts. It's not the job of someone who can who knows how to use a computer or a laptop easily. Now here also saying that you need to find these multiple supporting chains. This here also shows the benefit of gathering weak narrations. So like Ibn Hajar rahmallah, he explains in his kitab Quwwatul Hujjaj fi umum al-maghfira lil Hujjaj, on page 12 he mentions there that وبهذا يظهر عذر أهل الحديث في تكثيرهم طرق الحديث الواحد ليعتمد عليه، إذ الإعراض عن ذلك يستلزم ترك الفقيه العمل بكثير من الأحاديث اعتمادا على ضعف الطريق التي اتصلت إليه. So when you learn that Imam Abu Yusuf rahmallah, when he knew 300,000 weak narrations of Bahat, then you would want to know, like, why would he memorize weak narrations? So this is the benefit of knowing weak narrations. Like Imam Ahmad rahmallah, he mentioned the same thing in the Masail Ahmad ibn Hanbal, which is what the riwayah of Ishaq bin Ibrahim bin Hani in volume 2 on page 167, Imam Ahmad rahmallah said, قَدْ يَحْتَاجُ إِلَيْهِمْ فِي وَقْتٍ. So then the student said, كأنه لم ير بالكتابة عنهم بأسا. That قد يحتاج إليهم في وقت, that you will probably need these narrations which are weak, these asanid which are weak, because they can lend support and they could strengthen other narrations. Likewise, in Al-Ilal wa Ma'rifat al-Rijal, there Imam Ahmad rahmallah, it's mentioned that he said, Al-Ḥadīth an-Naḍar قد يحتاج إليه في وقت. That narrations which are narrated from weak narrators, there are times when you would need those narrations, and this here is what the riwayah of Marwazi on page 163. Then he mentions one exception, and we'll discuss that a bit later, inshallah. So here he mentioned the example of a mastur narration. Now, like we said, it is getting all of this here from Ibn Salah rahimahullah. So Ibn Salah rahimahullah, he also mentions the example of mastur, and then commentators go into the discussion on whether he is restricting it to a mastur narration. That means only that narration which is narrated by someone who is mastur, who we don't know his condition, whether he is weak or whether he is reliable, only those narrations can be strengthened, or all types of narrations which have a slight weakness. So here, then, when you're doing Muqaddamah ibn Salah, then you do the whole detailed discussion that, and the preferred view, ultimate view is that any narration which has a slight weakness and is supported will be considered as Hasan. It's not only restricted to the narrations of a mastur, because we say he's taking it from Ibn Salah. So Ibn Salah, as we said in the previous lesson, that he took it from from Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah, and then he invented these two categories, and from Alama Khattabi rahimahullah. So if it, when he took it from Imam Tirmidhi, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah himself mentioned with regards to Imam Tirmidhi, وَلَيْسَ هُوَ فِي التَّحْقِيقِ عِنْدَ التِّرْمِذِ مَقْصُورًا عَلَى رِوَايَةِ الْمَسْتُورِ. So when you're going back to the bases and to the roots of it from Imam Tirmidhi, then you find that Imam Tirmidhi, he did not restrict it to only the narrations of a mastur, بل يشترك معه الضعيف بسبب سوء الحفظ والموصوف بالغلط والخطأ وحديث المختلط بعد اختلاطه والمدلس إذا أنعنه وما في إسناده انقطاع خفيف. And thereafter, Ibn Hajar rahmallah then proved, so he always says in his nukat, he proves that this is not a tamsak. Rather, he actually went through the entire Jami' al-Tirmidhi, and he found that Imam Tirmidhi, he grades narrations as Hasan if a person, if there were narrators with weak memories, or who used to make mistakes, etc., and if they strengthen each other. So he, in this way, he's proving that Imam Tirmidhi did not restrict it to mastur narrations, and therefore the ruling will be any narration which has slight weakness, irrespective of why the weakness is. For example, in Mudallis, we'll do the narration or the chapter of a Mudallis where a person, he tries to so sometimes he doesn't want to take his teacher's name, and then he uses the word an, and he narrates from his teacher's teacher. So that's called tadlis, and how despicable it is, etc. We will do all of that in detail, inshallah. But if a mudallis, if he has to use the word an, and he narrates, then that is regarded, if he's a reliable person, then it's regarded as slight weakness. So these kind of weaknesses can be removed. In Radul Muhtar, it is mentioned there, Alama Ibn Abidin Shami rahmallah, he says, لكن هذا إذا كان ضعفه لسوء حفظ الراوي. So here when we're talking of سوء حفظ الراوي, because remember we spoke about Hasan lidhatihi. So Hasan lidhatihi is where there is slight weakness. Remember we put the emphasis on that in the previous lesson. Here when we are talking, it's a bit more weakness in the memory. So he has a weak memory. As-Saduqul Amin, but in spite of having a weak memory, he is reliable, he is trustworthy. So you can see he's mentioning that those kind of narrations can also be strengthened. Only irsal, or if there's a missing link, or tadlis, or jahalatu halin. So it is much more broad. It's not restricted to only the narration of a mastur and a narrator. Now, so we're mentioning that slight weakness. When it comes to severe weakness, then the preferred view. So I'm saying preferred view because I'm not saying it's the only view. The preferred view is that it can never be strengthened to Hasan. So you remember that statement which we quoted earlier from Imam Ahmad rahmallah. I told you that there is an exception. So the full statement goes as follows: that al-hadithu an al-du'afa قد يحتاج إليه في وقت. Thereafter he said wal-munkar abadan munkar. He's saying that a munkar narration, that means for now just understand it as those narrations which are extremely weak, forever they will be extremely weak. They can never be strengthened. Yeah, Allama ibn Salah rahmallah, he mentions this crucial point in his ulum al-hadith, that he mentions that if someone wants to act clever, that's how you can translate the text of it. That if someone wants to act clever, the literal translation, if someone wants to act clever and ask that how come there are so many narrations which which are transmitted through multiple asanid, yet they are still regarded as weak. So Allama ibn Salah rahmallah says وجواب ذلك أنه ليس كل ضعف في الحديث يزول بمجيئه من وجوه بل ذلك يتفاوت. And then he mentions that if there's severe weakness, then it will not be strengthened. So Allama Zayla'i rahimahullah, he mentions the same thing in Nazb al-Raya. And as you know, that this here is from the Hanafi viewpoint. And you can see it's affecting a mas'ala in the Hanafi madhab. So he says, وَأَحَادِيثُ الْجَهْرِ وَإِن كَثُرَتْ رُوَّاتُهَا. That the reading Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim loud when you start Salah. You know the Imam, if you ever went to Dubai or you went to one of these countries in Egypt, etc., where there are many Shafis, then you'll see that before Surah Fatiha, the Imam reads Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim loud, even in Malaysia, etc. So the Shafis, they believe you read Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim loud. So why do Hanafis not practice upon it? So before coming to Allama Zayli's answer, if you want to an answer ala sabili tanazzul, if you say why do Hanafis not practice upon it, because Ibn Hajar rahmallah taught us that we must give preference to narrations which come in Bukhari and Muslim, and in Bukhari and Muslim it comes that Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't make jahr bi Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. That's ala sabili tanazzul. But the correct reason of why is that you got those narrations. So ahadithul jahr wa in kathurat ruwatuha lakinnaha kulluha da'ifa. Now the mawdi' al-shahid is this here. Al-Mazili says وَكَمْ مِنْ حَدِيثٍ كَثُرَتْ رُوَّاتُهُ وَتَعَدَّدَتْ طُرُقُهُ وَهُوَ حَدِيثٌ ضَعِيفٌ. There are so many narrations where in spite of having numerous narrators, and in spite of having many chains of transmission, they will still remain weak. Allama Jazairi in Tawjih an-Naḍar, he also explained the same thing, and in fact we'll go through this whole text because it's directly linked to an example which Mullah Ali Qari rahmallah gives in his commentary. So Allama Jazairi says إن الحديث الضعيف قد يكون ضعفه ممكن الزوال وقد يكون غير ممكن الزوال. He says that a weak narration, sometimes it's possible to remove all the weakness, and sometimes it's not possible to remove the weakness. فإن كان ممكن زوال وذلك فيما إذا كان الضعف ناشئا من ضعف حفظ بعض رواته. So he's saying that when is it possible? For example, if the narrator has a weak memory, مع كونه من أهل الصدق والديانة, in spite of being pious, honest, trustworthy, فإذا جاء ما رواه من وجه آخر عرفنا أنه قد حفظه. Because when a person tells you something, especially if you have to take our memories compared to the scholars of the past, they will regard all of us as having extremely weak memories. But that doesn't mean that you can't trust anybody. If you're a sheikh, if someone who you hold in esteem is to tell you something, then in all probability he's nowhere close to the memories which the scholars of that time would look at, but yet you will trust him. So when a person has a weak memory, it's not confirmed 100% that he's making a mistake and he's lying. Rather, it says that you are taking additional caution in the field of hadith because you don't want to attribute to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam something which he did not say. So here when you find that there's two people whom are mentioning the same thing and they are both honest, they're pious, and they are telling you the exact same thing, then you know that, okay, this person in this particular narration, he did not make a mistake. Thereafter he says, وإن كان ضعفه غير ممكن الزوال كالضعف ينشأ من كون الراوي متهما بالكذب. Like you can see here, he's saying that the narrator is accused of speaking lies. So when a person is accused of speaking lies, it means that narration is extremely weak. He's saying then فإن ضعفه لا يزول بروايته من وجه آخر. And thereafter he gives the exact same example which Mullah Ali Qari rahmallah gives here. So Mullah Ali Qari rahmallah says, يشكل على هذا قول النووي حديث من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا. So the hadith من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا. This is how Mullah Ali Qari rahmallah mentioned it here. He never mentioned the full hadith. And what's the reason why he didn't mention the full hadith? He just mentioned half the hadith because there are so many different words which complete this hadith. For example, من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا ينفعهم الله عز وجل بها قيل له ادخل من أي أبواب الجنة شئت. So you can see how this narration ends. It enter from whichever door of Jannah you want to. Then, but then you also get من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا من أمر دينها بعثه الله فقيها. Allah Ta'ala will raise him as a faqih. And obviously, if Allah Ta'ala raises him with a faqih, then all the fuqaha of the ummah. وَكُتِبَ لَهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ شَافِعًا وَشَهِيدًا. On the day of Qiyamah, he would be regarded as a martyr, as a shafi'. Then this same starting again. مَنْ حَفِظَ عَلَى أُمَّتِي 40 حَدِيثًا مِنْ أَمْرِ دِينِهَا بَعَثَهُ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ فَقِيهًا وَكُنْتُ لَهُ شَافِعًا. So this here is and Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam will intercede on his behalf. Then من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا مما يحتاجون إليه من الحلال والحرام. This is how it comes, that from what they need to know between halal and haram. That means in ahkam, so it's constricting it. It's not just on fadail. كتبه الله فقيها عالما. Then again it comes with different words. من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا من أمر دينهم بعثه الله عز وجل يوم القيامة فقيها. So you can see all these kind of different wordings. من حفظ على أمتي حديثا واحدا. It comes like that also. كان له. So there are different ways that the same narration ends, and therefore Mullah Ali-Qari just mentioned it like this here, that he didn't complete the hadith. So Mullah Ali-Qari then says that ورد من طرق كثيرات بروايات متنوعات. You can see how many different ways we have transmitted it. But then after what he says, واتفق الحفاظ. What he's saying? واتفق الحفاظ. That there is ittifaq, there's total agreement amongst the experts, the huffaz, على أنه حديث ضعيف, that it will be a weak narration, وإن كثرت طرقه. Even though there are so many different turuq, then to be regarded as a weak narration. And then he brings the statement of Allama Mundhiri rahmahullah to say that إنه ليس في جميع طرقه, that in spite of having so many different chains of transmission, but there is nothing which could cancel the weakness from it and make it and strengthen it. Why is لا تخلو طريق منها أن يكون فيها مجهول أو معروف مشهور بالضعف. He's saying because each one had a narrator who was extremely weak. But now we'll just translate it as that instead of going into more details. So then this is what Allama Mundhiri rahmallah said. But it's not only Allama Mundhiri rahmallah who said, there are so many other scholars who mention the same thing. For example, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, he said, so in Talkhisul Habir, he mentions there that first he says how Ibn al-Jawzi rahmallah mentioned it comes from 13 different Sahaba. And then he brings a statement of Allama Mundhiri saying that Allama Mundhiri rahmallah wrote an entire kitab, and then Ibn Hajar rahmallah abridged that kitab, and then his conclusion out of doing all this research, he says ليس فيها طريق تسلم من علة قادحة, that there is no chain of transmission which is not extremely weak. So Allama Sakhawi rahmallah quotes Imam Nawawi rahmallah, and he quotes Sheikh Ibn Hajar rahmallah, and this here means that he fully agrees with them. He said that first he quotes, he gives you different narrators who Ibn Jawzi mentioned in Ilal al-Mutanahiya, and then he said that turuquha kulluha da'ifa wa laysat bithabitin. He quotes Imam Nawawi, and likewise he quotes Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. Likewise Allama Munawi rahimahullah, he also mentioned the same thing. He said, وإن كثرت طرقه ومن ثم اتفقوا على ضعف حديث من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا مع كثرة طرقه لقوة ضعفه. So what's the reason? Yeah, and this is the reason why I quoted the statement of Allama Munawi rahmallah, because he's showing you why are the multiple asanid not assisting here. لقوة ضعفه, because of the severity of the weakness. So it wasn't for قوة ضعفه. If it was just a little weakness, then it would have sufficed. But here, because of the severe weakness, therefore it is not assisting. Likewise, Ibn al-Mulaqin rahimahullah, he also said that هذا الحديث مروي من طرق عديدة بألفاظ متنوعة واتفق الحفاظ. So you can see it's not just one scholar who's mentioning there's ittifaq. There are so many different scholars who are saying that there is ittifaq, that all the chains of transmission here, all the asanid here are extremely weak. And therefore, in spite of having so many different chains of transmission, it does not help in strengthening this narration. Likewise, Muhammad bin Darwish al-Hut, he said that له ألفاظ مختلفة وأسانيد واهية لم يصح منها شيء. Mentions in أسنى المطالب في أحاديث مختلفة المراتب. So just to give you one small example of to see what kind of narrators narrated this here. If you look, Ibn al-Jawzi rahmallah, when he was commenting on the one sanad, he said that قال الحفاظ هذا عبد الله بن أحمد يروي عن أبيه عن أهل البيت نسخة باطلة, that he's narrating from a script which is batil. Likewise, so commenting on this hadith, he quotes then, he says ورواه الحسين بن علوان عن ابن جريج عن عطاء عن معاذ والحسين متروك الحديث. He's متروك الحديث. And Yahya bin Ma'in said al-Husayn kadhab, he's a great liar. Ibn Abi said that يضع الحديث, he fabricates hadith. So you can see it's narrated, transmitted by these kind of narrators, and therefore it cannot be strengthened. And that's why Mullah al-Qari rahmallah, he mentions that because of all of these, but before mentioning that, he then tried to say that there is an alternate view as well. You have Abu Tahir as-Silafi in his Arba'in, he mentioned that innahu ruwiya min turuqin. He says that it's narrated through multiple different chains of transmission. وَتَقْوَى بِهَا, it becomes strong because of it. وَرَكَنُوا إِلَيْهَا, and therefore the muhaddithun then accepted it. وَعَرَفُوا صِحَّتَهَا, and they realized that it will be a sahih. But then he responds and he quotes a response of Allama Munziri rahmallah, that or rather, instead of saying a response, an interpretation, that Allama Munziri rahmallah said that يمكن أن يكون سلك في ذلك سلوك من رأى أن الأحاديث الضعيفة إذا انضم بعضها إلى بعض أحدث قوة. But after that, Mullah al-Qari rahmallah says that فظهر أن المسألة مختلفة فيها إما في نفسها أو في اختلاف الضعف من الخفة والشدة. That because of severe weakness or minimal weakness. So he's saying that then he quotes Al-Masubki rahmallah saying that al-hadith إذا اشتد ضعفه لا يعمل به ولا في الفضائل, that when a hadith is extremely weak, then it has absolutely no worth and you cannot practice upon it. Even if it means in fadail, you cannot practice upon it. So like this here, it's not only Al-Masubki, there are many other scholars who also had the same view, that when you have a narration which is extremely weak, then even if you have many more asanid which are at the same level of weakness, they do not strengthen each other at all. In fact, Allama Zayla'i rahimahullah, he said, بل قد لا يزيد الحديث كثرة الطرق إلا ضعفه, that when you have a narration which is extremely weak, the more turuq it gets, it actually makes it more weak. So what does this mean? It doesn't mean you have a liar coming and telling you something, an absolute liar, a person who you know that fabricates hadith. Then you have another liar who's coming and telling you the same thing. Then you have a third liar who's coming and telling you the same thing. So now you will begin to scratch your head and wonder that how come it's only liars who manage to get this narration? How come there's not even one reliable person who could manage? So definitely these liars, they colluding here, or they agreed to fabricate this lie. So you can see that's what he's saying that بل قد لا يزيد الحديث كثرة الطرق إلا ضعفا, that when there is extreme weakness. This here is the one view. Obviously, there are other views as well. For example, other scholars, Ibn Hajar rahimahullah, in his Al-Imta' bil-Arba'in Mutabayina bi-Shart al-Sama', he mentions there that if a narration is extremely weak and you have many extremely weak narrators narrating it, then it will strengthen, but it will not strengthen to the state, it will not strengthen to husn, rather it will just become, it will not go out of the domain of being weak. It will just become be regarded as a slightly weak narration. So They said لكن تلك القوة لا تخرج هذا الحديث عن مرتبة الضعف. That means it will still be regarded as a weak narration. And then you know how he said that Sahih narrations are on different levels. So here then he mentions فالضعف يتفاوت. فإذا كثر طرق حديث that when there are many extremely weak when there are many weak narrations that رجح على حديث فرد. فكون الضعف الذي ضعفه ناشئ عن سوء حفظ رواته إذا كثر طرقه ارتقى إلى مرتبة الحسن. So if it is a little weakness, it will be upgraded to Hasan. So to understand it in our context, if it is in business class, it's being upgraded to first class. And if it is little, if it is severe weakness, then it's or rather instead of saying business class to first class, if it is because first class is Sahih narrations. So say if it is in economy class, it's being upgraded to business class. But then, you know, in economy class, you get all those different grades and there's different alphabets you see on your ticket when you buy. So if you have something which is extremely weak, that is the cheapest ticket on economy class, you can't change the ticket, you don't get no refund, etc. Now you're being upgraded to a higher level in economy class. So that's how, if it is extremely weak, but at the end of the day, you're still in economy class. So yeah, it's extremely weak, it's being upgraded, but it will still be regarded as a weak. Now, yeah, one thing which comes to my mind, and just to mention it, is that we're speaking here about this narration being extremely weak and how it can be upgraded and will still be regarded as weak. So we find that many scholars wrote, so you can see all these ulama, they use the word ittafaqu, and they're saying that there is a total agreement that this narration will be weak. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah, yeah, in the same kitab al-Imta' bil-arba'in al-mutabayyina, in a مخطوط it comes بشرط السماع, and many of the prints it does come المتباينة السماع. So he mentions there that فإن نفرا من العلماء لما رأوا ورووا قول أطهر منسل وأظهر منسل من حفظ على أمتي 40 حديثا بعثه الله يوم القيامة فقيها من طرق. Then he's saying that some of them have regarded it as he quotes the same statement there of Al-Masilafi rahimahullah, and then he's saying that scholars then began to actually write books on Arba'in, and so many books are written on Arba'in, where scholars gathered 40 ahadith. You know, and probably if depending which madrasa you went to, many madaris they also have to memorize those 40 narrations of Imam Nawawi rahimahullah. So so many scholars wrote books. So that he quotes there, Ismail bin Abdul Ghafir al-Farisi, he says, اجتمع عندي من الأربعينات ما ينيف إلى السبعين. I have that over 70 different books which are collections on 40 ahadith. So scholars like this here, they went and they still gathered. So this year, this practice of theirs shows that they deemed it permissible to practice on slightly weak narrations. So therefore, if someone has to ask you that what's the proof that you can practice on weak narrations, then if the person is not a scholar or anything, then instead of going in a very intricate debate, you just tell him that the books of the hundreds of scholars who wrote Arba'in, that's my proof. That the fact that based on a weak narration, they took out the time to write an entire kitab shows that they are practicing on that weak narration. There is sufficient evidence to show that you can practice on weak narrations. Now, very quickly to go through here because we're going through too slow with this kitab. So anyway, after trying to convey the definition of Hasan li Ghairi by showing how it differs here with Hasan li Dhati, Ibn Hajar rahmallah reverts back to the discussion of Hasan li Dhati now, and he says وَخَرَجَ بِاشْتِرَاطِ بَاقِي الْأَوْصَافِ الضَّعِيفِ. So here he's not explaining Nukhbatul Fikr, because in Nukhbatul Fikr he didn't mention anything about Baqi al-Awsaf. Rather, he's referring to his earlier statement here in Nuzha an-Naḍar, that والمراد مع بقية الشروط المتقدمة. So he's trying to say that the remaining 4 conditions have to be there. Then it will be regarded as a Hasan narration. And if any of the other 4 narrations are missing, then it's going to be a weak narration. It's going to be a da'if narration. It's no more going to be a Hasan narration. And then he says وهذا القسم من الحسن مشارك للصحيح في الاحتجاج به وإن كان دونه ومشابه له في انقسام إلى مراتب بعضها فوق بعض. He says, now talking about the ruling of a Hasan narration. So he's saying that a Hasan narration is exactly the same, just like how you can use a Sahih narration and you can practice upon it in the same way you can practice upon a Hasan narration. So we have explained, and I even we put a link there of Khalid Daris's kitab, that in the Mutaqaddimun, they would have put Hasan in the category of Sahih. So if they put it in the category of Sahih, obviously they were practicing upon it, just like how they practice upon Sahih narrations. So here too, and this is also the view of Hanafis. Munazafar Ahmad Tanwi rahmallah, he says, Al-Hasanu ka-Sahih fil-ihtijaj bihi وإن كان دونه في القوة. This is in his قواعد في علوم الحديث. أما خطابي رحمه الله says, based on this here, وهو الذي يقبله أكثر الفقهاء ويستعمله عامة الفقهاء. There's a whole debate on whether this is part of the definition or whether it is the ruling. But now just understand that it's the ruling, that a Hasan narration, it is that because you can use it for ihtijaj, therefore the all the fuqaha have used it. Now after mentioning Hasan lidatihi and Hasan lighayrihi. So Hasan lidatihi is okay, rather we just stop here instead of rushing. We'll just stop here and carry on Thursday inshallah. Until then, jazakumullahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.